to my presentation on how to VGC Draft League with Weasley, and I'm going to be presenting basically on my, my team from this season, and how hopefully you can try to improve your team as well. So, first thing we gotta go over is, I'm not a professional, I'm not the best out there, I don't claim to be the best out there, but I've done it a couple times, these tricks work for me, so hopefully they will for you too. Hopefully. So, VGC Draft is where... Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. VGC Draft, you pick 11 or so mons that you're going to compete against other people throughout an entire season with, and you're going to end up using, well, ironically, some good Pokemon and some bad Pokemon. So, you play 9 weeks, and then you play playoffs, hopefully, so that you end up... And if you win the playoffs, which is a single elimination tournament of best of threes, you will win the league. You draft your own Pokemon, which means that everyone gets to pick in a serpentine order, first to last, then last to first, and first to last in round 3, and so on and so on. And there's only one of each Pokemon on the board, which means that if someone gets you a Pokemon before you can get it, then it's tough luck, I'm sorry. But frankly, that's a good thing, because it means that not everyone's running around using, I don't know, Fluttermane all the time, or Urshifu. I'm not going to talk about my feelings about Urshifu especially. But, yeah, that's how it works. So, the most important thing you've got to keep in mind when drafting is budgeting. You look at your low tiers, you look at what's available on the board, and you try to figure out, okay, what can I go around? What can I build around? What can I do with these, frankly, not very good Pokemon? You want to make sure that you have as many resources as you can going into the season, because you can get, like, Dusknoir's good Trick Room Setter. You can get that for pretty cheap. And it's going to do just as well as something that's higher, let's say Dusclops. Or you can click Shell Smash with Cloyster, you can click Blizzard with Articuno in Snow, you can set up Sand with Sandaconda, then you just go ham with something like, I don't know, if Dracozolt was legal this season. There are all sorts of options that you can use, and that's sort of the magic of it. And you've got to make sure that you are watching over what exactly you're doing. You save a few points in the early rounds, don't splurge it all like a lot of people do, and then you'll be able to fill in the holes in your team and just essentially build a good draft. So the first pick that you choose is going to be a real important one, because you really can't get sniped, so you've got to choose something that's going to contribute each and every time it hits the field. So you're going to get, no matter what team structure you're going for, this is always a good general rule. So if you just want a generalist team, you can go for something like a Fluttermane or an Iron Hands. You can go for something like Trick Room or Ursaluna. Every Rain team wants Archaladon. Every Sun team would want a Chi or an Ogerpon Hearthflame. Which, there are other options for setting weather, but you want to have that big hitter that is always going to do something. In this case I chose Shenpao because it's super consistent, it hits super hard, it's super fast, and it's just always going to do good. So, now you want to be looking at, okay, what am I going to build around this? How am I going to get these Pokemon to work together? And I felt a bit bad about this one, but I chose Dragonite because if you're a long-time VGC player, you know exactly what Pownite does. It clicks E-Speed, it does good damage, it's reliable, that's all you can ask for. And yeah, I'm splurging a bit at the beginning, but I'm going to be able to stretch those points out. Now, You gotta go for the... Now, after you have your offense, after you have those breakers that can threaten the opposing team, you've got to make sure you don't get broken heart too hard yourself. Best way to do that is to start with something that resists what you need it to, her offense needs you to, basically. So, Chen Pao and Dragonite, they're both weak to Rock, they're both weak to Fairy, they both don't particularly like getting burned, and they're both physical attackers, so Intimidate can do a number on them. So, I was barely awake for this pick, and I just, sort of out of my subconscious, I think I chose Empoleon, Flub Penguin. As competitive, it can basically just deal with most of the things that How Knight struggles into, and it's a good start for defensive core. I wanted to go for a Fairy Steel Dragon at this point, but honestly, someone I would call a friend, Professor Miss Mag, he was devious. He decided to take my Comfey before I could get it. And now, this Comfey was something that I was a little upset about it, along with certain other individuals who might have been upset, but I ended up rolling with it, and I just had to find a new 100 base speed support Pokemon that could keep my Pokemon alive. Get clowned on for this, but I chose Toad's Cruel. Yeah, he's a beautiful boy. And he's going to be doing all the redirecting for my team. He's going to eat a lot of hits, just like Empoleon. The Water Steel typing was good for me, and I wanted a Fairy Dragon Steel again, but decided I might as well go for like a Fire Water Grass as well. And it does get Trick Room too, which is going to be useful. It's one of the things I wanted Comfey for. My fifth pick, I could finish off my Fairy Dragon Steel, but I also want the Fire Water Grass. And oh boy, I think I got a good one for a low price. Torracat. Now, Torracat is sort of like Incineroar Zero Sugar. It's faster, which means it can't pivot slowly, and it's not got the dark typing, but it's also a mixed attacker, and it's, again, pretty fast. It can Wisp you before you can attack, but it also parting shots before it can take an attack. So, if you know, just it being Incineroar Zero Sugar is enough to justify me picking it in this point, because if you haven't had the misfortune to face an Incineroar, basically it just comes in, drops your attack, fakes you out, parting shots out, drops your attack again, so that it can come back later and drop your attack. This thing's a nightmare for physical attackers, and I think it's going to prove to be that. And let's face it, the biggest thing that Incineroar has going for it over Torracat is the fact that it has Dark Stab and it's good offensively, but I think I got that covered. Now, I saw an old Pokemon that I really like to use that seemed underpriced. I wanted to fill out the Fairy Dragon Steel. It might have been a bit risky, but I ended up choosing Espeon. It's got an insane 130 special attack. It's also fast at 110 speed. It matches Latios or Gengar. We'll get back to that later. Sword of Ruin boost Size Shock, and it's 7 points. Magic Bounce. I think it's going to work well. Now, I probably need to stop taking risks at this point, since I just need to fill out that central core of my team. And that's going to involve picking up a Fairy, which multiple had been sniped for me at this point, so I knew I just had to do it. I had to lock it in and pick Florges. It's good at supporting. It's got Pollen Puff, Helping Hand, Symbiosis. It's got all the neat toys that you can play with. And I'm gonna get some stuff that Florges is even better at supporting. Namely, you usually pick your Paradoxes with it. You pick your Iron Treads, you pick your Great Tusk, you pick your Roaring Moon to go along with Florges, because booster energy will boost your stats, and then you can add another item on top of that to boost your stats again. But I decided to go with a less traditional paradox. Yeah, Bro thinks he's Tyranitar, but he's not. Doesn't have the special defense, but he does have that boost. He does have that flying resist, and he does have that boost from Sword of Ruin as well, and I think he's going to hit pretty hard. Not the central attacker of the team, but a pretty solid one. Also got a bunch of support moves recently. Electro Web, Snarl, Breaking Swipe, you name it. So, Mischievous got chosen, Banette got chosen. It's a little nervous about securing this Mon, so I just wanted Haunter at this point, even though it was the lowest cost Mon on my team. Watch out, watch out, watch out. So when it comes to rounding out your team, you just decide you want to finish it off. You want to get resistances to those few types that you still need them for. At this point, I still kind of want to resist Rock, since Rock's probably going to be a bit of a problem, but I also want to resist Ghost. I also need a bit of a Trick Room answer because my slowest Mon is Empoleon at 60, which isn't ideal. So, I ended up just going with my boy Greedent. Everybody loves Greedent. Goes well with Florges, as you saw. Florges just flings berries at him all day long. And he's just slow. He is the Trick Room threat. He does not counter the Trick Room threat, he is the Trick Room threat, but he can also make himself super bulky. I think he's good value. Now, this little guy is just adorable. And they say you can't draft 6 Mons with 5 points and only 1 pick remaining, but Phalanx rounds out my team, eh? Eh? Come on. So, here's the core of it. Here's the meat of this presentation. Here's why you've got to pay attention to this drafting. Everyone plays an important role on the team. Every Mon has tools that it uses to help the others. They're all friends here. So, Shenpao, Dragonite, they're the big boys. They do the big damage, they step up to the plate when something like a Garchomp shows up. Who's going to cover for Iron Thorns when Garchomp shows up and flicks Earthquake? That's going to be Shenpao. Or, again, who's going to cover for Florges when you end up you just end up with a steel type that like Florges or Espeon can't break through. You have the tools here to break through those steel types, break through those water types, those bulky waters. You have the tools to break through pretty much any team structure, and that's because of the fact that you built it around a strong foundation here. You got these mons that fill out your cores, your, well, Fire, Water, Grass, your Steel Dragon Fairy, and then you've got that strong offense with those priority moves. But you've got to just figure out what that will be for your team. Are you going to build it around weather? And you've got to have those strong weather users that, like that Archaludon or Zapdos and Rain that'll cover for your weaknesses. It can't just be like the same type on every team. Well, the same type on every one of your Mons on your team. Because the fact that everyone has weaknesses. We just cover for them because we're friends. And that's what life should be like too, isn't it? Iron Thorns, he does real good damage. He's a good paradox, in theory, but he just struggles to deal with those ground types. Espeon struggles to deal with those steel types. It can't break through them, and Iron Thorns just gets O-code. So you can't reliably bring them every time, but they're really good under the right situation. If you build them well, if you just you just need to figure out who can help who. You need to have people who can do the heavy lifting and those who can support. Like, if you got right here, John Wick. Chen Pao is John Wick, but John Wick is unable to make a movie without all these other people surrounding him, right? Now, some people might ask, why draft low tiers when you can do the same thing better with high tiers? Why draft Espeon when Gengar exists, same speed and special attack, or Latios, who can drop those strong Dracos? Gengar could spam Shadow Ball really, really hard. But each Mon covers for something differently. Each Mon has its own thing that it does for the team. Whether that's support, if you carry Encore, if you carry Fake Out, if you carry that really unique typing that's really hard to crack through. Now watch this. Just consider Gengar and Latios at their own little level. So Gengar is really frail, but it hits really, really hard. It's got that Ghost and Poison Stab, it's got those coverage moves, unlike Espeon, that can break through those Steel types. It's got a Nasty Plot. And it's just really... It's got those utility moves as well, with Trick Room, Icy Wind, all that versatility. But watch this. Haunter has all those utility moves too, but it's cheaper. It's got Levitate. It's got... When you combine it with Espeon, it actually costs less than Gengar. And you fill up 2 speed tiers, and these low tiers can just work together to accomplish the same thing that a top tier can do, but better a lot of the time. And you can also bring them both to a match if you even choose, and then you can threaten things even more than Gengar ever could. Because Gengar's just one Mon, it's really frail, it's got its own weaknesses, it's gotta carry Sash. Haunter can carry Eviolite and last for a fair bit longer than it can if it needs to. Same thing goes for Latios. It sets up Tailwind. It hits hard with those Dracos. It can ally switch. It can click those just strong moves that will break through the opposing team with specs. But Espeon can click the strong specs moves, just like Latios can, even though it can't break through steel types as well, with Mystical Fire or Aura Sphere. Dragonite has most of those covers. Dragonite has a ton of coverage. It can click Tailwind and be bulky with Multiscale. It's pretty reliable at that. It covers another speed tier. It can click E-Speed next to Chen Pao, and it's just generally going to be a lot stronger with these two than you can be with these. And guess what? 12, 16, 16, 7, 3. This is 26 points for these 3 Pokemon combined, and it's 28 for these two. So if you only draft your top tiers, like, let's say you want to do something with, like, Iron Hands. Iron Hands gets Fake Out, it gets that strong close combat, Drain Punch. It can do a lot of things, it's got a ton of coverage, that you can fill all of its roles even if you don't get it, with those low tiers. And you can do it even better, frankly. Roll compression is valuable. Roll compression is something that you need to keep in mind. These 2 Mons are fantastic. I wouldn't oppose anyone drafting them. But if you don't get them, it's not the end of the world. Because you can figure out how to manipulate and how to move around these tier lists and these Mons in such a way that you can be creative with them. So these Mons, like this Haunter, this Espeon, this Phalanx, this Creedon, are going to turn out to be really valuable for your team. And cohesion, in this case, the ability to use all sorts of different Mons depending on the scenario, because each Mon only gets 4 moves, it can only do one thing at a time, is really important. And you can also fill... So, I hear a lot of people talking about how, oh, why would you use a lower tiered Pokemon when, in Draft League, in Draft League, it's often perfectly viable to use low-tier Pokemon. People are just sometimes opposed to it, I suppose, because of the fact that they're used to playing normal VGC. Normal VGC is a ruthless world out there for low tiers. Like Thundurus. Thundurus is incredibly reliable. It is a Defiant Sweeper, it's a Prankstermon, it's him, basically. Thundurus is him. I've seen it do a lot of good things. It's really fast. Why would you ever use Kilowattrel? I've heard people go as far as to say Kilowattrel is terrible because of the fact that Thundurus exists, and Tornadus exists, and Talonflame exists. They can set up Tailwind and Speed Control more reliably than Kilowattrel, so why even consider it? I've seen people say the same thing about Great Tusk versus Iron Treads, or Lando T versus Iron Treads. Why would you ever consider drafting Iron Treads when those two mons exist? Each mon, though, has its own valuable, important role to play. Kilowattrel is competitive, but it can't take hits, which means that it can't last long enough to generally force people to bring out their Intimidate user. Iron Treads, it's fast, it's bulky, but it can't hit as hard as a lot of the other ground types that people use. It can't click those big moves, like Headlong Rush, and just delete something. But they can be stronger effectively than some of those other top tiers because of the fact that given mons synergize well with each other. Like Judas, my Kilowattrel, and Eleanor, my Iron Treads from the previous season, and HC Stark's using them now together really well as well. These two mons are really good together because of the fact that Iron Treads takes really good advantage of Kilowattrel's Tailwind, and Kilowattrel likes the fact that it deters those Ice types and Rock types. And Iron Treads loves the fact that Kilowattrel doesn't allow in those Intimidate mons that can prevent its booster sets from sweeping. And now they just work together in happiness. Prankster is banished because it's just a prank, and the big ol' elephant over here just goes back to his den because of the fact that they can't really match true teamwork effectively. And now they're free to spam Disquake forever in peace. One of the best things you can do to work on actually team building, like, you've got to figure out how to get all your mons to be cohesive together. So, one of the things you can do is use type charts. If you draft defensive cores, if you draft your Fairy Steel Dragon, your Flying Grand Electric, your Firewater Grass, then generally you'll end up having a good type chart. But you can check these anyway, just to see, okay, what holes do I need to fill? What can I do to make this better? I've used an example of Professor Mistmag, again my friend from earlier, who drafted a really good type chart. He's got all the tools he needs. He's got that Fairy Steel Dragon right here. He's got that Fire, Water, Grass. He's got that bulky ground type. He's got the support. He's got everything, frankly. You use the dock to see what holes you might need to fill. And then you grab everything together because those mons do exist that can help you fill your holes. And basically you figure out, okay, who's going to work well together when they're on the field, because doubles is a game of 2 Pokemon and not 1. Sometimes if you have a big nuclear threat next to something that is like an Applin or a Magikarp, it's not going to win against 2 well combined. So this is one of the 3 core building blocks upon which you can build your team. And ironically, none of those building blocks are actually Stonejourner. It's kind of tough to get into a team, but you definitely can, and it's definitely probably worth it. Or is it? Now your speed tiers are very important because you've got to make sure that everything... One of the biggest things you can do, again, is your speed tiers, because of the fact that you just have to make sure that it's not very easy for your opponent to EV their Pokemon to outspeed a consistent number of yours under Trick Room or under Tailwind. Like, Trick Room down here, Arboliva is going to cover for a lot of the slower Pokemon. You have to be very careful with your EVs, and you can't reliably bring Trick Room because Arboliva is just going to attack first and possibly KO you. But then up here, it's also hard to deal with because you've got these fast mons that are going to be very difficult to outspeed consistently with any of yours. But I don't recommend putting these two, like, they have the identical speed stat right here, which isn't ideal. Generally, you want to spread out your mons as much as possible to force as much EV investment into your opponent's Pokemon as possible. Because the more speed investment they have, the less offense or the less HP defense investment they can afford. And again, you really love to see that Darth has really consistent ways of outspeeding opponents. He's got naturally fast mons, he's got tailwinds, he's got those big hitters that can prevent you from playing defensively a lot of the time. He's got Prankster, Priority, and he's got that low speed. One thing I would recommend, though, is... well, Klefki is a decent Trick Room setter, but it's not the ideal one. It's pretty solid overall, though. The last of the three big ingredients, you have to have the moves. You have to have access to the things that you need to mitigate damage, to redirect, to just prevent your opponent from KOing your big attackers, because otherwise it's just a big shootout. You don't generally know who's going to win, and it's dependent on the matchup. You don't want to fish for that. So you gotta have those control moves, you've gotta have your T-waves, you've gotta have your follow me, screens, all those statuses. Well, fake out's important. Any way you can mitigate your opponent's ability to do damage to your big attackers is crucial, as well as having those big attackers. Snowrent does a really good job of this. You want to take control of the game, you want to put yourself in a position where you're guaranteed to win, and prevent your opponent from doing the same. Those are the three building blocks. So, why would you do this? Why would you build so carefully? One of the most important things to keep in mind in building is, what are you capable of? Do you have to deal with the same weaknesses over and over and over again every week? Are your opponents just going to bring Rock Slide, Rock Slide, Rock Slide, Rock Slide, and you get flinched all the time and it's irritating? You can't let that happen if you have a solid defensive backbone on your team. That also enables creativity because you don't have to counter the same things every single week. And it's going to be more fun for you generally. You don't have to, sweat and try hard and make sure that everything is absolutely perfect. But those are the pillars upon which a good team is built. Your type chart, your speed tiers, your tools. And I suppose your stats as well. But you've got to make sure you've got that core there, those central mons that you can make sure to threaten your opponent with that they have to deal with. Those big mons like Chenpao, Dragonite. But you've also got to make sure you've got those tertiary mons, like Iron Thorns, Espeon, that are also threatening damage but can support their team, even if it's quite a bit more inconsistent than the other ones. You've got to make sure that you've got that defense. Those mons that can switch in and take hits if they need to. Those mons that can deal with all those big attackers from the other side, because they're going to have them. Why would you prep for these crazy sets when you have to deal with this big threat over here? You can afford to build crazy sets and have fun with it a lot more, and generally probably succeed a lot more if you build it all on a firm foundation. And team building is just like building friendships, I suppose. Sometimes you've got to put your heart into it at the beginning, and it'll be all worth it in the end. So, Draft League's a complicated game. You're not always going to win. It's not always going to be easy. But you should generally just figure out what you want to do with your team think it over, get your offense, get your top tier offense, get your defense, make sure everyone is doing their job, everyone has that role that they can play. I once had sort of a Rev room that didn't really do anything because its role was already being played by other Pokemon. Pokemon is inherently valuable on your team because of the fact that it has stats, it has moves, it has those things that can contribute if it needs to. But you've got to figure out a way that everyone is contributing. Like, a team is not just as good as its top tiers, or its bottom tiers. I see a lot of discussion that soundness of your team isn't as valuable as, well, just having the best mons. And even if you have a fundamentally bad team, you can still beat a fundamentally good team, or vice versa, or whatever, if you just think. And another thing I recommend for Draft League is treat yourself with love. Treat the game as if it's just a game because it is. And make sure that you don't base your self-worth on something so trivial. Because you are a human being who needs love. Everyone on this planet is a human being who needs love. And you've got to make sure that you are having fun in this game. Because, again, it's a game we play for fun. And I salute you all the friends who have helped me build up, I suppose, my confidence in this game. And I appreciate sorry, everything that's been done for me throughout my life.